Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse. In this episode, we reflect on a recent conversation between Ross Douthat and Ezra Klein on what is the primary progressive narrative. What are the stories that we tell ourselves to live by, and who has the best story? We're going to be looking at this from a cultural analysis perspective, and obviously as Christians. I think you'll find this helpful to step back and think about the meta-narratives that people are trying to live by or are failing to find, and this will in turn help you do a better job of interacting some of the people who live in the world around you with a bit of a heavy cloud over them. If you like what we're doing, you can share this content, you can like, you can subscribe, or you can donate by visiting www.toltogether.com.
Ross Douthat, and can we just take a moment to pat ourselves on the back for being able to pronounce his last name after all these years?
Humility. He was talking about
Yes,
humility.
humility and how I achieved it. Just kidding. But anyway, so Ross Douthat, who is, I think, always worth your time, worth listening to, sat down with Ezra Klein. So these two
You
are
got his name right too.
politically
2 for 2.
Yes, 2 for 2. But so these 2 are very, very different politically and pretty much in many categories, but they're both very informed thinkers and social critics and journalists. And so the 2 of them sat down to talk about the respective visions that animate their political sensibilities. And it's a wonderful conversation. And Nathan, when you first listened to this, you reached out to me pretty quickly and said some of the questions that Douthat was asking were very, very interesting and very helpful. So I wonder, how did his questions stand out for you at first there?
Where did this go? Yeah. Actually, first, you've quoted her in the past, the philosopher, the author. I think she's recently passed, who said we tell ourselves stories to live. Who was that?
Oh yeah, so we tell ourselves stories in order to live. That's Joan Didion.
Joan
And
Didion.
she
Okay.
said that, yeah, she said that in a very famous essay called The White Album. But Joan Didion was an investigative reporter and a novelist. She was in her 80s when she died, so she died very recently. She was a fascinating person, an amazing writer, very glamorous as well, very stylish. I mean, if you see pictures of her, she makes an immediate impression, but she wrote that sentence just to give proper context. It sounds really inspirational when you just hear it on its own. We tell ourselves stories in order to live. A lot of people have used it as a kind of inspirational quote, but that's not at all how she meant it. If you read the rest of that essay, she's writing about a very chaotic time in American life. So she had in mind the Manson murders at Cielo Drive. That was one of the events.
Mhm.
But she was also writing from the context of a personal breakdown, like a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
But her takeaway is not so what she was feeling was a sense of losing the script. She
Yeah.
said,
Well, that
in
that
essence,
is what's going on
yeah.
here. I
No,
think that's
it's very a lot of people find it very relatable because she's basically saying, "I'm a reporter. I'm used to going into these chaotic events and then putting, kind of imposing a narrative structure on them. But in reality, I have no idea what's going on. And I feel more and more as though none of this means anything. And I go to therapists who tell me, well, you're losing touch with reality. But the takeaway of the essay is, no, I'm not crazy. Everybody else is crazy. Anyway.
yeah. So, but that is, and so she wasn't saying that in a flattery way that we tell ourselves stories in order to live. But I think if you look at history and at the felt reality of many people today, we would say, no, we do. That she's
It's a
right.
coping mechanism is what she's saying. Yeah.
Yeah, but so let's think about it not as a coping mechanism, but a way in which humans are structured to function.
Yeah, well, no,
I
I
mean,
think she's
I
wrong
don't.
on that, by the way. But
Yeah,
I think it makes a lot of sense. But
I don't
I would
think
say,
water is a
yeah,
coping mechanism. Drinking
right.
water is not a coping mechanism. I mean, it's a coping mechanism for thirst, but it's a legitimate. There is a cellular reason, a biological reason that you need to drink liquids.
You need it for
So
survival, and you
you
need
need it for
stories for
survival.
survival also.
You need
Yeah.
stories for survival. So this is.
Yeah.
Let me tell you. Let me back up and just put a little bit of a personal spin on this first. So about a little over a year ago, I was at a church conference, um, group of people who obviously saw themselves as extremely liberal in their Christianity. So, like second coming to Jesus, no physical resurrection of Jesus, no infallibility of scripture, certainly not. Um, and they were sort of delighting in the sense that their form of a more fluid, less bigoted and nationalistic Christianity was going to become a safe haven for the ex-evangelical movement. So the ex-evangelicals are those who are ex-evangelicals who are coming out of a sense of um, well, we have lots of thoughts on that, have done podcasts on that. But they thought, by really embracing a more fluid and egalitarian Christianity, obviously you'd want female pronouns for God and that kind of like you get the picture. You know who I'm talking about. That we're going to be able to pick up these ex-evangelicals that are moving because our churches are dying. But if we hold to this more inclusive, fluid vision, then the people who are leaving the more conservative Christian evangelical side will come and join us. And the keynote speaker they had, Berkeley, it was taught at Berkeley. It was like everything was just stereotypically perfect. And in the Q&A, I asked the presenter, I said, "Look, you guys are talking about how this evangelical movement, your branding of theology is going to become a place where these people will congregate. But I said, if I look at the evangelical movement, it is largely structured around a political narrative. And so people are leaving Christianity not so much for the theology of it, but because of the political implications and the way that those political implications are worked out in their local congregations.
Mhm.
So if the reason that they're leaving their local congregations is for political differences, not for theological reasons, what do you have to offer as a theological story that the Democratic Party doesn't? How can you distinct what is the story that you have that is different than what a political movement could provide for them? And I thought it was a pretty good question. And the guy looked at me with a straight face and he's like, "Oh, yeah, no, absolutely." He's like, "You don't have to be a Christian in order for these, the brotherhood of man and the love of everything. You don't have to be a Christian for that. And certainly political vision will do that for you. Let a thousand flowers blossom." Um, and then there was a pause, and I was so close, Cameron, to being in like saying and that's why I eat your lunch in 10 years. I didn't say that out loud. But
Mhm.
there's no way
Yeah.
there's no way that you can have a vision for the future that has no structure to it and nothing specific or precise about it and is a very anything goes and is defined only by what you're against and have that be I don't know, maybe that works. I've just never seen it and never had any inkling to join anything like that that is that vague and ambiguous. And so I felt vindicated then when Ross Douthat was asking Ezra Klein the same story of like, what is the more politically left vision for the good? What's the story there? And because I think that was essentially the question that I was asking too at that time of like, what is the story? And I asked you this question. You were talking about a friend who's going through a really rough time in life, left the church, left problems with marriage, that whole sort. And I was like, so what's the story? What's the underlying vision of like, okay, this is what it is that I want to be doing with my life. This is how I make sense of me to myself. And it turns out that usually as people age, that a strict naturalistic materialism doesn't cut it. Um, I don't know what the story is on the purpose of life outside of a theological structure. And I mean, obviously, there's been a lot written on this. Charles Taylor and his whole idea of the buffered self and the social imaginary, and the ways in which we feel like we can construct our own individualized stories and meanings and distract ourselves from having to ask the bigger questions. But it seems to me like we're living in a time
Yeah.
in which that ability to hyper individualize our own meaning is not really working out that like it's not really a super spunky vision of something that I would want to get out of bed for in the morning. So that's the background that it was more of a confirmation of something that I've been observing more than anything else.
So, 2 observations there. One of them you've already said. We're seeing a breakdown of that vision of individualized freedom because we're experiencing what is being labeled as a crisis of meaning. The phrase crisis of meaning is fine, but it's a bit clinical and detached. On the ground, what that means is that people increasingly feel that their lives are empty and hollow. One way of looking at this. I mean, just one example. Have you heard the phrase bed rotting, Nathan?
I have just recently.
Yeah. Yeah, the notion that you well, so I guess they're they always have to put a generational spin on this. Gen Z are doing this. I have I don't think it's just Gen Z who are doing this, but yeah, where you just basically stay in bed, don't get out, and just scroll on your phone for very long periods of day, perhaps all day. So that I have a strong feeling that that's not just Gen Z people. But so there's that. There's a sense that this isn't working. You're finding people are feeling relatively hopeless and feel that their lives are empty and that they lack meaning and coherence, and that's borne out in a number of different trends. It's borne out in statistics. But then there's the other observation I want to make, Nathan, is that let me start with an illustration. So there was a book that came out a number of years ago called The Real American Dream: A Meditation on Hope. This is written by Andrew Delbanco, who teaches English at Columbia. So he talks about an attraction at Disneyland called Tomorrow World. And Tomorrow World is what
Tomorrowland,
it sounds like.
Tomorrow World. Which one is
Is
it?
it Tomorrowland, Tomorrow World? So yeah,
I don't know. One of you
I can't
Disney
remember
fans, you
precisely.
know.
You'll set us straight. But the idea is you walk into this section and it's a futuristic place. But it never really worked as an attraction, and it may not be open anymore. That book was written quite a while ago, so it might not, but it was consistently not a popular attraction. And Delbanco theorizes, I think quite sensibly, that the reason is we don't have a firm vision of the future in North America, and we don't really want one because we're all about the journey these days, but not about the destination. So in that book, he looks at the American dream in three big movements: God, nation, self. You can think about it as a kind of a narrowing funnel. So first, you have a vision, whether they're Christian or not. There's a strong biblical heritage to this nation. And for the record, Andrew Delbanco is a secular Jew. That's how he would define himself. But he recognizes lots of value and beauty in the Christian vision because he's an English professor, and so a lot of what he loves and cherishes was nourished by Scripture. But initially, you do have a larger animating vision of a nation under God. Then that turns in a more national direction, and the real key figure he locates there is Abraham Lincoln. But then eventually, you come to a place where it's narrowed down to the self. It's a purely private vision of freedom. This is where we find ourselves today. And in that context, it's really so, Nathan, you asked what some of these people I've known who have fallen on hard times, walked away from their faith, their marriages have floundered, that kind of thing. How is that working out for them? Well, or what are they doing now?
I I'm not
Here's what well,
critiquing
hold
I'm
on.
not critiquing the life
No, no, I'm
situation.
not.
Yeah, so let's
No,
be
no, no,
clear
no.
there. But
That's
yeah.
not what I'm hearing you saying. But I think an answer that they would give is that they're figuring things out. And I suspect that there are a lot of people who maybe are tend in a more progressivist direction would say something along those lines that no, it's okay. We're figuring things out. We don't need because a firm here's the thing about a destination. I'll say this, and then I want to kick it over to you again. And I also want to hear how Ezra Klein answered that
Mhm,
question. I'm really curious about that. But the if you a destination is inherently limiting. It
mhm,
comes with limits, doesn't it? Because now there is a place, there's a specificity to where you're going, there's an actual goal, there's a telos, and so your option you lose some of your options. If it's completely open-ended and you're figuring things out as you go, there's still there I can see the romantic draw that that has for Americans who have a certain vision of freedom that is open-ended. And so that's
mhm.
where the whole people would nuance it differently, but yeah, the whole "we're figuring it out" answer
Yeah.
comes into now you can ask how's that working out for you, but yeah, we're figuring it out.
Do you think I was so Ezra Klein's there are 2 parts to this. One is so they both sort of agree that in the 2024 election, the Democrats had set this up as an existential crisis that the world would end if Trump got elected, and then he did. And so, like, the whole narrative peaked in 2024. for a
And we're still here.
Democratic.
The rapture didn't happen the other day,
Yeah,
by the way. So
it's
yeah,
amazing. We're recording this
yeah.
post the event.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, which I think if you listen to the political narrative at the time, that was very much the sky is like Donald Trump will destroy the
Yeah.
world. Oh, then that's still alive
Yes.
and well out there. You can find every New York Times chat
Yep.
section has that. Um, so if you see Trump not being president as that was the narrative arc, and then he becomes that, everything flies apart because like, well, we're still here, it happened, but there wasn't really. And so the the vision, and I think this is true, collectively speaking, is that it is a techno futurism, essentially, is that the social dysfunction that we experience is due to a failure of technology. And that when we have certain technological things in place, that it will harmonize society in a new way. So I think the techno futurism is the vision, is the narrative, massive focus on AI and maybe things like universal basic incomes and reordering society to bring about a vision of what ought to be. Now, the history of that is brutal and bloody. We know that.
Hmm.
The success rate of that is less than ideal. We'll just charitably put it that way. Um, and it's still
Very
not a
diplomatic. Yeah.
great it's it's still not a great vision. So, because Ross was saying, yeah, but even if you had something of maybe more of a traditional standard narrative of like, uh, go to college, buy a house, get married, raise a family, and then find the ways in which politics and technology supported that vision, that's still a more
Yeah.
coherent something that you can do and participate in as an individual. Whereas, like, well, maybe the government will pass this resolution that'll allow this technology to build the thing that means that I don't have to do this thing. Like it doesn't engage in and connect in the same way. But when you were talking about tomorrow, the Disney tomorrow, whatever it is, think about how our futuristic movies work. Either they're super dystopian,
Hmm.
right? I mean, so our view of
Oh
the
yeah.
future is inherently dystopian, or the utopian ones, the real story is the technology and the journey. So why does something like Star Trek work? Well, they never
Right.
get anywhere. It's just they're discovering new things along the way all of the time. And
So
there's some camaraderie
boldly
as you go.
go where no man has gone before. That's the figuring it out
That
piece. And Star
that's the
Trek is a
figure.
great example of of a utopian show that was very and continues to be very successful. But interestingly enough, most of our I'll bring this in a bit, but most of our future visions right now are overwhelmingly dystopian and dark, almost to the point now where it's a cliche. But
Or think
anyway,
yeah, but think of other sci-fi. So you got the Kirk and Spock rationality,
hmm
human, like there still is a
yeah,
conversation there about character and community and friendship and
hmm
loyalty and reason and human impulsiveness. That's in there, and they're figuring it out as they go. But then look at something like Dune, where when you read the full
hmm
Dune trilogy, it is a theological, philosophical story that has technological elements within it. And so it still is, it's not enough. So there are stories about the future that are dystopian, or the way we imagine them is really focused on the technological benefit. Like what was the Jetsons? I mean, you could take this all the way down to the most simplistic, cartoonish versions of this. It really is a vision that technology will save the day and will save
you know what I
humanity.
think? You know what I think is the most quintessentially American science fiction story?
Oh, can't wait to hear this one.
Back to the Future.
Oh yeah, okay. Tell me why.
Because because
It's the
here
cars
on the
and the
one
mullets.
hand, well, yeah, so I think most people a really fun vision of the future was Back to the Future 2. You think, where are the flying cars, for goodness sakes? Now, Back to the Future 2 didn't invent that. The the real precursor there is Blade Runner, actually. The visual style of that movie was massively influential. But no. What I mean about this is Back to the Future is so much the we're figuring this out mindset. Because in the end, the moral of the story in Back to the Future is, look, you shape your own destiny. The past doesn't define you, and you can make of your future whatever you want. That's the
If you're
moral
technologically
of
clever. If you're technologically
if you're
clever.
technologically clever, which so technology will empower us to do that. And now Back to the Future is tremendous fun. Okay. I like Back to the Future. Don't hear me as the killjoy. Now, if you want to be a nerd about it, it falls apart very quickly because it doesn't deal with any of the interesting time paradoxes and all that. But, the films that do are not very interesting to most people because they get lost in their philosophical quandaries and it gets really, really abstract very quickly. But it is as a quintessentially modern romantic American vision, you're not gonna find a better example than Back to the Future.
Okay, so what are we saying here, though? Is that really your non theological vision of utopia? Your hope is built in NVIDIA chips. I mean,
It's
that's
human
ki-
ingenuity. We're gonna figure this out,
yeah, I guess.
and we're up to
Except
the
for,
task.
except for, except for, here's the thing is that the crisis of meaning and the lack of a story does not only happen for people who are in a tough spot and in a bad situation. It happens for people who have everything at their fingertips, who have all they could possibly imagine, who have the wealth, the houses, the relationships, the power. So I'm saying that it's I mean, this was even the like all the old Russian literature. What do you do when you own 100,000 acres and you have so many thousands of
Yes.
serfs and you're in charge of like what do you do? Like what is the meaning of life when you have it all?
Well, I have a question for you, Nathan.
So
This is
there's
a and it's
no
you
success is possible, I think, in that story.
No, well, because you're perpetually restless, first of all. You're never gonna be yeah. If you're if you were successful in this vision of figuring it out, you'll have rested on your laurels and stopped. But the vision of continual,
E-
endless,
enough is
perpetual
not
development, yeah, you're always driven to you always want more, to do more, to conquer more, or use, to discover more,
okay.
to go further and further.
But here's the problem with that is that the vast majority of people who are bed rotting, it's a horrible phrase, by the way, um,
It is, it's nasty. Yeah.
is that they don't feel like they do have the personal agency to participate in that story. So I'm
So here's
saying even the story
yeah.
is not comprehensive enough to include the vast majority of humans.
No, it's not. So let's let's go there. Let me go there by asking you a question that you should be really good at because it's a question you always ask. And that is the techno-utopianism that you mentioned seems to be dying. That is, I mean, there's such massive pessimism and doubts regarding technology these days, it seems. I mean, and in some ways it's understandable. Somebody like a Sam Altman doesn't do himself any favors. He is really like something out of a bad science fiction novel with some of the statements that he makes. But say a little bit more about that, Nathan. What's going on there? Because it seems like that techno utopian vision, which was alive and well and thriving for a while, is dying on the vine at this point, and that many people don't the few who do seem to be in places of real power and privilege, but all the rest of us have our phones and are lying in our beds and feel very much otherwise.
Okay, well, just let's do a little thought experiment with me, everybody listening. What is the biggest problem in your life that you think technology could solve? I think we're coming to a realization that we are seeking solutions to categories that I think. Okay, so would it be cool to like have a deeper integration of a AI assistant to do like reconcile expense report receipts? Sure. Is that your biggest problem in life? Probably not. Like, you know what I'm saying? Or like optimize the fuel injectors on your car. Awesome. Get your Amazon Prime delivery 97 minutes earlier. Sweet. Um,
Yep.
right,
You can see
like
the miss swing in the miss here. Yep.
build customized entertainment for you. Awesome. Like these are I mean, this is all fun. That'd be great. But I like there's it's a solution to like it's a solution to a category in which the problems that I have, those solutions can't be the meaningful
Okay.
like, okay, you don't have a
Let's
girlfriend. Do you really think that an AI
yeah.
chatbot is the solution that you are actually seeking, or is it just the solution you've been told you can have? So it's a vision of settling not
Yeah.
a vision of what
Yeah.
you know at this phase of your life is possible.
Yeah, and I think that's what, yeah, so that was gonna be my follow-up, yeah, because the real problems, the biggest one of the biggest ones right now is just, yeah, I want a girlfriend or I'm lonely. I feel like I have a lot of people around me, but nobody really knows the real me, and I'm just lost, and I'm lonely, and I really want people in my life who understand me and love me.
And the
So
insidious
what's
thing is
the
that
answer
all of the
there?
technological solutions have made that problem worse by every
Yes.
measurable study of the fact.
Yes. Yes, they
So,
have made it worse. But what you're saying, Nathan, is also that most people know that. They're not fooled. They're not taken in by the, "Oh, yeah, if you put together for yourself a customized significant AI significant other." Most people don't buy that. Like, "Oh, they may do it. They may indulge in this, but people know this isn't working. This is not going to fulfill me. This is not the same as having an actual flesh and blood person in my life."
yeah. So, I think it's pretty bleak. That's my um and then when we start thinking so let's say that there was a vision you could get excited about here, Cameron. And I don't know that we've pinpointed.
Mhm.
It goes back to, and if you're listening to this, there's a long history of Christian apologists and atheists going back and forth where the Christian apologist says, so what is the purpose of life? What is the meaning? And the atheist saying, we have meaning, we have purpose. And the apologist being like, so what is it? And they're like, but we have meaning, we have purpose. It's like, yeah, to biologically reproduce, I guess. I once I once chided an entire group of MIT students about being far less successful as humans than the average Amish woman
Mhm.
from a biological perspective. I mean, like if the purpose of life
Yeah.
is it went over
I
about
see.
like that. So
Yeah.
I was like, if you start playing by the rules that you're telling me you're playing by, you are failures at your own vision. And I did have to follow that up with like, don't go out and make a baby tonight as a response to my talk, as a
Sure.
sophomore in college. But the um I'm craving a consistency in the narrative, but let's say that you can find it like that you really can outline a techno-futurism vision of meaning. And then you're going to say, okay, I have the vision. How do we get there? And we're going to say, you know what? All that's required for this is everybody in the world to get on the same page and everybody to vote correctly. And
That's
a
all that's required.
that's all that's required. Like, I
That's
mean, and
all.
I talked about this a
Total
lot, man, from, like,
cooperation.
Greta
That's all we're
Thunberg was a
asking
bigger
for.
thing on solving climate change. All that you have to do is get everybody in the world to agree on the right idea. Like, if that was the solution to your outcome, people should be way more depressed than they currently are because, like, there's no historical
None. Precedent. None.
I'm legitimately trying to figure out the so, I mean, and the flip side of this is you come into this, as a Christian, you probably at one point in your life sung the hymn, "My hope is built on nothing less."
Mhm.
And it really does come back to like, what is the core, the foundation of the story of reality? And then what is the like, can I? We had a friend, Cameron. I've talked about this before, who was in the Air Force and part of a panel on trying to reduce suicides among service members. And the solution was to do meaning making workshops where you help people
Mhm.
make their own meaning, and the suicide rate went up. Um, and
Yeah.
he was like, "Go figure. When you make your own meaning, it makes you feel less connected to other people." Um,
Yeah.
and I know I'm being a little tongue in cheeky about this, but you either laugh or you cry, and I'm choosing the humorous version of this, not to cry about it. But it is not some. I think the tone by which we do this in our actual conversations and engagement should be really really careful because
Okay.
it's a big problem.
It
And
is.
so
Let's
it's not like, "Oh, it's these kids these days who don't wanna work and they're just sitting in their beds on their phones."
no.
That's a byproduct of something else, um, that's bigger in our culture. It's not like there's a unique problem with 19-year-olds today. So, the story is turning out to kinda be there is no there there, um, and
So let's
that's
go back.
tragic.
Let's bookend this. Let's go back to Joan Didion again and her thesis about stories, how we tell ourselves stories in order to live. That's true. Her her point seems to be that there is no there there, and it's just a desperate coping mechanism. We can agree with her in part, though, and say we do tell ourselves stories in order to live, but we need stories in order to live. But we need to say more. We need a larger story in order to live. We need a story
Hmm.
that exceeds, that's bigger than us. We need a
We
bigger
need a
story.
story that we can participate in with other people.
Correct. So it's a shared narrative where meaning is not purely private. It's shared, and it's not something that we invent. It's something that we discover, and that it is bigger than ourselves. And this is one today very compelling draw to the church, because in the church you have a story that makes sense of who we are, makes sense of our tendency to mess everything up, our fallenness, but also gives us a vision for what we are made to be and what we can, by God's grace, become. And it's a
Do you know
story
a good
that's
example
bigger
of
than
this?
us. Yes.
Go listen
Yes.
sometime to Paul Kingsnorth's testimony. So,
Yes. Yeah.
atheist to Buddhist to Wiccan to Christian, where he basically, when he gets around to Genesis, is like, "Oh yeah, this seems the most right." I mean, now he's a
Yeah.
literary figure and giant, but he's like, and he
But
openly
he
talks about. I mean, we're at a time, Cameron, when Peter Thiel is talking about the Antichrist everywhere that he goes.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's your techno futurist guy who can't do it in non theological terms.
So, we do need stories the same way
Jonathan
we
Haidt,
need
Jordan
water.
Peterson, like we could just keep throwing it
We
on
do
there.
need
Of
stories this the same way that we need water, as you said, the same way that we need oxygen, but it can't just be any story. The story has to be bigger than we are. And this is where, once again, I want to yeah, I wanna say less at this instance and just say, if you're a person sitting on the fence or curious about Christianity, approach take a look at the Bible and approach it with fresh eyes and see it not just, it's not a set of commandments and moral edicts. It is a story. It is a narrative that puts humanity into a very definitive relationship with a creator, and also gives to humanity a very real destiny as well. And also, scripture is unsparing. There's a whole lot of very dark aspects in the Bible, because there are a whole lot of very dark aspects to our human existence, but they don't get the final word. It's not the whole story. It's very compelling, and it offers a deeper, more meaningful vision of our life here and now, our life together, and life as it will one day be.
I think the other uh, part of this is to recognize that the Christian story, the first time you run across it, is a bit wild. There's a God who loves you, who believes that your life has value and meaning and purpose, that you're sinful, that you can be redeemed, that you can have meaningful relationship, that you can mess up and be forgiven, that all will be well in the end. That's a big story. And people say that's ridiculous. And I would just gently ask, ridiculous compared to what? That the purpose of your life is to scroll through YouTube videos to boost the stock of Alphabet? So there is a comparative element here where we are. It was too tidy when we talked about this in terms of worldview. Charles Taylor got closer to it with social imaginary. And when we say story, we don't mean story as in that it's false, but just like what is the arc of the way that you see the world happening and how do
A
you fit
narrative
into it?
that structures your vision of reality and gives to you a vision of your place in the world.
There's an interesting little thing in Revelation several times. Christians will be familiar with the term name written in the Lamb's book of life. And there are a couple times in Greek where it does say name written in the book of life, but there are other times in which it just says they were found written in the book of life. When I think of name written in a book, I think of a list, but there are quite a few of those that like they were written into the book of life is almost like they were written into the story of what was happening there. Not a register, but a participant in the unfolding work of God in the world. That's a that's a fun vision to think of for our faith. It's not that like, oh, I'm a Christian, therefore my name's on a list somewhere. But God is calling me to participate in his world in a meaningful way that has real outcomes. Um, there's a sense of freedom and responsibility and meaning that comes back in there that is a uniquely satisfying way to live. And I think that is the draw right now to a theological understanding of the world, of the sense that we have that I do want my life to mean something. We do want to have a cause to join. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we see a lot of people do that in political movements. We see a lot of people do that in social causes, where you can get um, wrapped up in a small story and really feel. And hey, community, hobbies, groups, all of that, great. But the offer is so much bigger than that, that it's worth us dwelling on that and offering it to people around us who are struggling to see how it is that they might participate. And actually, this, you know what you call helping somebody see their part in what it is that God is calling them to participate in the story of the world is? It's called evangelism. That's that's classically what that is an invitation to a way of life. Jesus said, "Come follow me." He meant that as a look over my shoulder and through my heart, as a way of engaging and living in the world and relating to that which transcends you, and in relation to that which you transcend, and relating to those whom you're equal with on the face of this planet. It's a good story. Happens to also be true. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.